All right, welcome back, everybody. If you guys visited us earlier, you will know that McKenna was live at 6:30 talking with Charlene Harris and Tony Kilner. So I think this is the first time we've actually done two back-to-back events in one evening. So I am John. I am the event coordinator here at Murder by the Book. Well, not here at Murder by the Book. We're in my living room right now. We're so excited tonight to have Joe Ide with us to talk about his new book, Smoke. But before I bring him out, while we're waiting for everybody to come find us from various corners of the internet, I wanted to do some real general store announcement. First up, I wanted to mention that while you're watching the event, we have had some issues with some spammers on some of the Facebook. So if you're watching on Facebook, if you see any comments that pop up that say anything like, hey, to watch this event, come click on this link, don't do that. You're already watching the event. You don't have to click away to watch the event anywhere else. You definitely don't have to give anybody your credit card. It's free to watch here on Facebook or also on YouTube. So definitely avoid any of those. Wanted to mention that we are open again. The store reopened for in-store browsing on Halloween. We're here 10 to 6 Monday through Saturday. We're still closed on Sundays at the moment. We also understand that not everybody is getting out and about in the world. So if you're still not going anywhere, but you still want books, we can do curbside pickup. Just give us a shout. We're happy to recommend stuff over the phone. And when you pull up, we've got a table outside that we can set books out there for you. Of course, we're always available by phone, or you can visit us at murderbooks.com at any time and place orders there. Whether they're mysteries or not, we can get pretty much anything if it's available with our distributors. Also wanted to mention, if you were unaware, we just launched a series of subscription boxes. You can visit murderbythebox.com to get some more information. We've got 3 different ones. One is a just kind of general best of the month. We just pick a book, any subgenre that we like for the month, and send that out with an exclusive meet and greet Zoom thing with the author. We have a cozy one, which I'm the one that picks out the cozy subscriptions for that. It's usually a start of a series. And then we also have one that's crime fiction legends, where we've been picking classics that we think are either underrated or just undiscovered gems that we think anybody should not want to miss. So definitely check all of that stuff out. Last thing I wanted to mention before we bring Joe in is that we just got an event scheduled for March 8th. We're going to be doing a series of events with Agora and Polis. The first one, of course, is going to be on March 8th. And we're so excited. We're going to be chatting with Josh Stallings, Cynthia Palaio, and Vito Rossinelli. This event was supposed to be scheduled in February, but we had to postpone it just because of some logistic issues. And it's actually gotten better now, because since we postponed it, we were able to actually stretch it out into 3 different events. So you can definitely look for an Agora and Polis event every night for the next couple of weeks. So I think that's all of my general store announcements. So we're going to bring Joe out and get our discussion started this evening. How are you tonight, Joe?
I'm as good as a writer can be.
Thanks so much for joining us this way. I'm sorry we're not able to do this in the store, but we're so happy that we can at least get to chat virtually.
I am too.
So for those of you who are watching who might not be familiar with Joe Ide is of Japanese American descent. Growing up in South Central Los Angeles, Joe's favorite books were the Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes stories. The idea that a person could face the world and vanquish his enemies with just his intelligence fascinated him. Joe went on to earn a graduate degree and had several careers before writing his debut novel, IQ, which was a huge Murder by the Book staff and customer favorite. It was inspired by his early experiences and his love of Sherlock Holmes. He lives in Santa Monica, California. And I wanted to mention, if you guys are watching us on the internet, if you have questions for Joe while we're chatting about either Smoke, the new book, or any of the other books in the series, please make sure you post those in the comments here on Facebook or YouTube, and we'll leave some time later to get to those. So to get started, Joe, can you tell us a little bit about the character of IQ and about the new book, Smoke?
The character IQ, his name is Isaiah Quintabe. IQ is his sort of street name. He's a young black man. He lives in East Long Beach. I moved the setting from South Central LA to East Long Beach because South Central now is almost solidly Latino, and I wanted a location that was more diverse and yet still not a great neighborhood, and that's East Long Beach. His priority is servicing the people in his community, and because it's economically depressed, he takes payment in whatever form they can manage, which might be blueberry muffins or fixing his roof. or repairing his car. And he is someone you turn to when there's nobody else to help. He takes the cases that the police can't or won't get involved in, and that's how he's known around the neighborhood. If you need help and no one will help you, go see IQ. And that's sort of his role. That's sort of how he thinks of himself. As he seeks justice for people who can't seek it for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, can you tell us a little bit about where we find him in this new book, Smoke?
In the previous book, High Five, Isaiah was chased out of town by this sort of network of gangs. And because there was a bounty on his head, a lot of private citizens got involved, and he just had to leave. And leave the love of his life, Grace. And he doesn't want to be IQ anymore. I mean, he's done. He's exhausted, and he has PTSD. He's just seen too much violence, too much suffering and mayhem, and he's done. And he drives aimlessly. He's just driving wherever the road leads him. And eventually he winds up in a little town called Coronado Springs in Northern California. And it's a very charming town and, just big enough. And he thinks, well, I'll stay here and get some rest, just sort of repair my psyche. And things are going pretty well for him that way for a while. But then he comes home one day, and this young man has broken into his place. His name is Billy. He's one of these nervous, antsy. His mind is 10 places at once, and he just broke out of the neuropsychiatric hospital in county hospital, and he claims that there is a vicious killer on the way to Coronado Springs, and he's coming to kill someone in particular. And Isaiah, once again, it's the last thing he wants is a case. It's the last thing he wants is another person in trouble. But over the next few days, Billy convinces him that this is real. Billy's mother is a district attorney, and he's so through her he has access to all the FBI criminal databases, and he's assembled real documents, assembled real evidence, and he makes a very strong case. And so Isaiah very reluctantly decides that someone will die if this guy gets here. So his task is to, number one, stop the guy from getting here in the first place, and secondly, identify the victim so he can get out of harm's way. And I would say that this is the closest Isaiah has ever come to death. This challenges him physically and mentally, more so than any of the previous books. And he is at risk in this story all the time. It's all the time. And it was hard in some ways writing it because I wanted to really push him to his limits and really just wring him out. And I kind of felt sorry for him, as I'm writing this. And that's the A plot, Isaiah in this situation. The B plot, which is almost, page-wise, is almost as long as Isaiah's story, is about his friend Juan L. Dotson, who is a ex-hustler. He is slick. He's opportunistic. He's very self-involved, but he's gone straight. He has a very no-nonsense wife named Charisse, who doesn't take any guff. And Dotson's been chronically unemployed for a long time. And she tells him she's had enough. She got him an internship at a big advertising agency downtown. And he either has to take that internship on and do well, or she will kick him out of the house, which terrifies him. He loves her and he loves his young son. And so his argument, though, is that he's not going to fit in there. It's a largely white world. People wear ties, and he's from the hood. He's a hustler to the bone, and he'll be like Lil Wayne at Sean Henry's birthday party. He'll embarrass himself and everybody. And he's making this argument, and he's making it well. That he needs someone to teach him, knowing that there is no one to teach him. Charisse herself is busy, and Grace is busy, and Duranda, it would be of no use in this situation. And so Charisse recruits her mother, Gloria, who was a vice principal at a middle school for 25 years. And it was a job she fit very well. She is stern. She's uncompromising. She had a lot of rules. She hates Dodson, and Dodson hates her. And she only does it because she loves her daughter. And Dodson has to go through this complete makeover, which is painful. He has to get his hair cut like Will Smith. He has to wear a suit and Oxford shoes, and he has to do things like change the way he talks. And he's a little too street. And so Charisse makes him binge watch Friends and say everything that they say the way they say it. And Gloria changes the way he walks and the way he sits in a chair. And finally, he does go into this ad agency and becomes an intern, but he works for a man who is burned out. He's a creative executive. He wants to retire. All he has to do is last one more year, and he'll be on retirement. But he can't do it anymore. And Dodson, in order to keep his internship, has to play Cyrano de Bergerac. He has to create ads for this guy to preserve both their jobs. And Dodson brings his street smarts and the culture, the world that he knows into these ads. And it's a much lighter story. And it develops Dodson as a character. And we see that he has many more skills than you might previously think from the other books. And so it's those two stories, sort of light and dark.
So one of the things that I noticed when I was kind of doing some research, you mentioned that when you first sent out the first book, IQ, you sent it out to a lot of different publishers, and you had several of them had passed on it because they said it kind of fell through the cracks, that it wasn't a mystery, it wasn't a thriller, and it wasn't necessarily a heist story. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, publishers, when they are considering a book, they have to consider a lot of things. Not only do they like the book, is the book commercial, but how they're going to sell it and who they're going to sell it to. And they have, a marketing machine that does things in a particular way. You have this whole bureaucracy that knows how to market a thriller, and they have a methodology for that. And mysteries and these different genres, they have a marketing plan and mechanisms in place to do that. And here you come along with a book that doesn't fit into any of these categories. And so 6 publishers passed, and they all liked the book, but they didn't know what to do with it. And thank goodness Little Brown came along and picked up the book and saved my life. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. We find, talking to authors a lot, that so much of what we think of kind of as a typical reader would think of as genre kind of definitely comes down to kind of market stuff. Like there's an author named Alex Grecian who writes these really great Victorian mysteries. And he, like, when you talk to him, like the further you got into the series, like the gorier they got into him, he was like, to me, I've always been writing these horror novels, but my publisher thought I was writing mystery. So I get published as a mystery as opposed to horror. So it's always interesting to me to hear authors talk about that. And I saw Ryan Stack, the Real Book Spy, had mentioned in, I think, the review for this new book, he said that one of the things that he's noticed is kind of throughout the course of the series, you've tended to play with kind of the subgenres a little bit. He said, like, IQ kind of felt more like it was kind of maybe the truest mystery of the bunch. And then with Righteous, there was a little bit more of a psychological feel to it. With Wreck, there was definitely more action. He said High Five, you brought in some more of the more kind of unreliable narrator perspective. And then with this one, kind of you tend to lean a little bit more into hard boiled. Was that something deliberate, or is that just kind of that's kind of what the story was asking for as you were writing it?
No, it wasn't deliberate. I have a I have a vague idea of story and some characters that I like, and then I just start writing. I write the first page, and that informs the second page, and that informs the third, and that's how I write. I'm making it up as I go along. I'm writing what occurs to me, and if that means more mystery, more violence, more humor, whatever it is, then that's the way it goes. I mean, I'm trying to write honestly in terms of the characters. You know, would they do this in this situation? Would they say this? Would they make these decisions? That's what I'm going by. And there are a fair number of readers who get on my case because, you know, this book isn't like the last, you know, or they say, well, he strayed from the formula that you know, worked for him. But I don't have a formula. I don't have a template. And I can't write the same book every time, even if I wanted to. I can't. I can't do it. The book goes where it goes.
We did an event with Walter Mosley last week, and he kind of said the same thing. Somebody had asked him, like, how do you decide whether you're going to write like a new Easy Rollins or one of your other characters? And he's like, you know, I just sit down and I think, I haven't checked with Easy in a while. Let me see what he's up to. And he's like, and I might sit down, and he's like, and Easy's walking down the street and he looks in the rear view mirror and this is what he sees in the mirror. And it's just, he's like, he just kind of hangs out and lets the character kind of just figure out like where he's going and what's happening.
Yes, yes. It's same for me. Walter writes, his books are much more political and they have much more social commentary than I do. But the process works in the same way. He's writing, and it's sort of a nexus between story and idea. He'll come to a situation and he'll see something to write about. He'll see a comment he can make or some overview he can offer, and so he writes it. And it wasn't planned. You know, it's not like he says, you know, I have these themes. He just writes when he sees the opportunity, and I write the same way.
And so how does that impact kind of your rewriting or editing process? If you're kind of doing it with not necessarily kind of a specific plot or mystery in mind, do you find that you have to kind of go back and include some of those kind of more mystery and plot elements to it after the fact?
Yes. I the way I write is incredibly inefficient. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. I'll write, say, 50 pages, and then I look back on what I've written, and I see that maybe I didn't carry through on a storyline, or I should have put another character in motion, or there's some other twist in the story I might have applied. So I'll go back and I'll rewrite that 50 pages, and then I'll turn around and I'll look forward to the next 50, and I can sort of see where the story could go and what characters you know, I might need. And as I write, I see more things to write about. I see subplots and I see new characters, and so I keep writing. I write that next 50 pages, and then I have to turn around and look back to see where you know, that first 100 pages is consistent. And so it's back and forth and back and forth, and a lot of the time it's on the same page, and that's the way I go. And then so rewriting is, I rewrite almost every paragraph.
Oh.
And so I'll go through the paragraphs, and then of course the number of things you see when you're doing it in that kind of focus, the more you see things that are either wrong or inconsistent or don't work, and it's sort of back and forth and back and forth. And so I rewrite as I go, and then I rewrite as specifically as just rewriting. But it's pretty tortured process.
And so, and I read in your bio too that you had a before you were kind of a writer of novels, you had also done some screenwriting. So can you talk a little bit about kind of the difference between the two, and has the screenwriting background helped you with the novel writing at all?
Well, if you're a sort of a middling screenwriter like I was, it's a pretty undignified job. you know, um, if you can't pitch, you don't eat, even though you're a writer. And since I wrote comedies for the most part, um, I was expected to be funny in the room. So there you're sitting in somebody's office. There is some person sitting across for you, and their assistant taking notes, and you're pitching your story. And I used to keep mine about 12 minutes, and you're supposed to encapsulate the story and entertain at the same time. And that took a surprising amount of work to get that distilled. And then you would have to go to maybe 5 or 6 producers and 3 or 4 studios and make that same pitch. And I sold maybe 1 out of 5. And so it was. You're always looking for that next job. You're always reading the trades and who's doing what and what producer wants what. And if I did a number of rewrites and specs, but once you start, it belongs to the producers. And so it's like building a house for somebody else. If they want the kitchen on the 3rd floor, you have to put the kitchen on the 3rd floor. And so I was never writing anything for myself. And the actual atmosphere, the people there, one of the things that really, just made me quit was pitching to this 23, 24-year-old executive who thought Pretty Woman was a classic. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh, come on, man. No, I'm a grown man. I can't do this anymore. And so that, yes, but in terms of helping me, it helped me think visually. So when I'm writing IQ, I see the scenes. I am the character. If he's driving a car, I'm driving the car, and I can hear the sirens and I can see the road ahead, and that really helps me. I think visually. I see the scenes, and it helps me write. It helped me write dialogue. To never write dialogue that doesn't mean something, that doesn't push the story forward or reveal the character or something. So aside from crushing my soul, screenwriting was helpful.
Yeah. And so let's go back a little bit to the origins of Isaiah. You mentioned being a huge Sherlock Holmes fan. And so in an interview, you said, I was a huge Sherlock Holmes fan and I grew up where I grew up and how I grew up. So when it came to write the book that was my only idea was Sherlock in the Hood. Can you talk a little bit about kind of how you take kind of those elements of Sherlock, like his intelligence and just kind of those core elements of Sherlock that people would recognize and kind of put them into a character, but not let it be kind of just a Sherlock Holmes pastiche?
Right. It starts with me as a kid. I was this anonymous fringe kid, small of stature in a really big neighborhood, and I couldn't compete or even participate on any level. I mean, it was a rough neighborhood. Not that it was. I mean, millions of kids grew up in rough neighborhoods, but I had no way to compete. I had no identity. I had no way to be in the world, and I glommed on to Sherlock, and I don't remember how, but I would go down to the public library in L.A. and which is this beautiful old building, and find a little corner and read Sherlock Holmes, and I identified with him in that he was a loner, he was a misfit, like me. He wasn't a badass, but he could vanquish his foes and overcome obstacles with just his brain. And like I said, I'm a small kid in a big neighborhood. That was a hell of an idea. Maybe I could do the same. I couldn't, but it was a powerful idea, that stuck with me. And Isaiah is really who I would have wanted to be. Smartest guy in the room, really quick, lots of skills. He's a good guy. He's a hero, and all the things I knew I would never be. And so I really did. He was my alter ego. And then in terms of, a story, I had no other background to write about. All my emotional attachments were in South Central, and that's why I said it was only my only idea.
And so let's talk a little bit about, we don't see as many people tackling kind of PI novels like we used to. It used to be a big part of the genre, and there's such a storied history of not only kind of PI novels in mystery, but also kind of West Coast PI novels. So what are some of the challenges of kind of playing around in those waters, knowing that it's been done by so many people before? Like, how do you put your own stamp on that?
When I wrote the first IQ, I consciously made him different. It's like, where does he live? Well, he doesn't live in a penthouse. He doesn't drive a Maserati. Um, he's not college educated. He's not smooth, and he's not cool. And he drives the anonymous car. And I'm making these decisions consciously. I do not want him to be like all the other detectives out there. And I wrote the kind of detective, again, the kind of detective that I would like to be.
Yeah.
To have this sort of, to have presence without being flashy. Kind of like that Steve McQueen cool, where he doesn't say anything, but he's in the room. I wanted that kind of character, and so that's the way I put him together. In every aspect of his life, I try to make him unique, his own, singular.
And so what kind of research do you do into kind of like how a private eye would investigate things, kind of the police end of it? Do you have like contacts like on the force or PIs? What kind of research do you do for the books?
I don't know anybody in law enforcement, and I don't know any PIs. I make stuff up. I do enough research. Well, what I'm going for is credibility, to make the scenes and the characters credible to the reader. That's my concern, not being accurate and not using what PIs actually do and what police actually do. I'm really not concerned about that. I'm telling a story. And the main thing is, how does it help the story? Now, is this working as a book? And so I have a very vast field of knowledge that is about this thick, and it's what I need. I'll research something in terms of answering the question that I want answered, and then I'm on to the next.
Yeah. So just enough so that way it seems plausible to the reader, and then you can move on.
Yes.
And so I have been reading through the quarantine diary that you did for the LA Times. Can you tell everybody a little bit about that and that project?
No, I can't remember. I swear I can't remember what I wrote. I've written a number of these things for different publications. I don't remember what I said. I think I gave some advice about sleeping, but that's all I can remember.
Yeah, it looked like it was like some about sleeping. And you actually, one of the things I enjoyed about it is you talked kind of a lot about kind of some of the stuff that you were reading while you were locked down. So do you read within the crime fiction genre? Do you read outside of it, all over the place? What do you pick up when you want to read something for pleasure?
All over the place. I read whatever I can get into. I need a story and a character, and I need it right now. And the genre doesn't matter to me. If I read a review, I get a recommendation. I see a list of best ofs. I pour through classics to see if one will get me interested enough to read 700 pages. And so I'm just always looking, and I'll read anything that catches my fancy. I've read very few books that I supposedly I should have read. Yeah.
And what's something that you've read recently that you've loved?
Ivy Pacoda. These Women and Wonder Valley, they both knocked me out. And I'm doing an event with her in March. I'm really looking forward to that.
I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
Um, Gabriel Tallant's absolute darling, my absolute darling. It's one of the scariest books I've ever read, and he writes so well, and it's so dark, and yet, it's a very I hesitate to call it entertaining, but a compelling book. And that book I really enjoyed, and I never read Tom Rob Smith, um, Child 44, and
Mhm.
that's everything you want in a novel, man. You know, and so I'm going to move on to the sequels one of these days. So that's what I've been reading.
His standalone, The Farm, is really great too. It's one of the, I think, kind of one of the best like unreliable narrator books I think I've read.
Yeah, yeah.
And I wanted to mention, since you mentioned Ivy Pacoda, since she was just, we're super excited. We just got the schedule. We just maybe added it to the website in the last day or two. If you guys are out there watching, we are going to be hosting a panel for all of the best novel Edgar nominees for this year. It's going to be on the store's YouTube channel,
Wow.
Saturday, April 24th, part of our Celebrating Independent Bookstore Day thing. So it's going to be 1 o'clock in the afternoon that day. We'll have all of the people that were nominated together, working with MWA. I think it's the first time that we've done something like that with them. So we're super excited for that.
Yeah, that
Um,
sounds like a terrific event.
yeah, and also wanted to mention too, if any of you are curious about Ivy's book, when it came out sometime in the spring, I feel like early on in the pandemic, we did a virtual event with her. So if anybody's interested in checking that out, you can check out the store's YouTube channel, because the interview there, we had a chat with her and Liv Constantine together. So I also wanted to ask, you mentioned this in your New York Times by the book thing, but can you tell us a little bit about your favorite fictional detective?
Oh, it was Sherlock Holmes for a long time. And
Mhm.
then in 2012, when I started to write IQ, I just happened to be rereading Devil in a Blue Dress. And because the thing I was worried about is not so much could I write a book, it was more would anybody read it? Black detective in the hood, gets paid in blueberry muffins. It's kind of, I kind of worry about that. But Walter Mosley wrote about my neighborhood and the people that I knew and the experiences that I'd gone through, and he gave me permission, really, to write my book. And I never thought I'd be anything approaching, Walter Mosley, but it was encouraging to see that a writer could succeed on whatever level, writing about the things that I knew,
Yeah.
and that was one of the reasons that made the book less daunting to write.
So, kind of going along with that. So, you mentioned, you're writing about this area that you grew up in, and like kind of basing it on people, and like kind of this area that you grew up. What are some of the challenges for you of writing a young Black character? Did you have anybody do like sensitivity reads, or have anybody do kind of any extra reading just to make sure that you got everything right, or do you feel like your experience growing up was enough that you were able to tackle that?
I never asked anybody anything.
Uh,
Um, Again, it goes back to me and my neighborhood.
mhm.
Um, Most of my friends were Black, and again, I'm like this fringe kid, but they had a cool way to walk and talk and dance and speak and their music, and um, that's who I wanted to be. I wanted to be a Black guy. Um, I was never quite convincing, but that whole, it's like everybody in the neighborhood was poor,
Mhm.
um, and everybody's wearing the same secondhand clothes, and I looked like I just jumped off a freighter in from North Korea, and they look cool, and that was that was that was the impetus for me being a watcher and a listener.
Mhm.
And I wasn't a participant. I was never in the mix, but I was always watching and I was always listening. And I couldn't articulate it then, but I was picking up a lot of stuff about that culture and how it worked and how the characters worked. And so, I still have friends there. And so it wasn't as if it was only my childhood. And that experience with African Americans just continued and continues. And so I just felt comfortable writing about what I wrote about. The question for me is, what is it honest? Is it, will this character say this, do this in this situation? Um, and people are surprised. I never really thought about it.
So do you have so one of the things I love about series is, you get to create this kind of world and you get to have all of these kind of secondary characters that pop in and out. We might not get to see much of them in one book, but then later in another book you get to catch up with them. Do you have any favorite secondary characters that you write?
My favorite really is Dodson. And then there's Deronda. Actually, the crew, the sort of regular characters: Dodson, Deronda, TK, Gloria, Charisse, and it's sort of like a little family. And I try to keep that nucleus up front.
This is another thing that I really love about crime fiction is that you kind of do get. I think crime fiction does a really good job of not tackling, but of bringing to the forefront kind of that idea of like chosen family work, where like as you're working on these cases and stuff with people, that you get to kind of gather these people around you who aren't blood relatives, but they really become family. And I think that's kind of one of my favorite things about the genre is you get to see that kind of over and over again, especially in series.
Yeah, those emotional bonds are what I look for. It's what I like writing about most, is characters and their connections and how they come together and how they disconnect. And there are this host of emotions that come with family and how they relate and how they all have different aspirations. And those emotional moments are what I look for. And when when I was growing up, there was a liquor store right around the corner from my house, A&J Liquor, and the winos used to sit out there on orange crates and drink Thunderbird all day. And one of them was this guy named Beck, and he was an elderly man, very tall, very dignified carriage. He reminded me a little Morgan Freeman, and he was always immaculate. He wore a herringbone sport coat, shirt and tie, brown slacks with a crease in them, and brown and white spectator shoes. I mean, he was sharp, and he did this every day. Now, my older brother's name is Jack, so he called me Little Jack, and he called my mother Mrs. Jack. Now, my mother, she's 5 feet tall, very, very prim and proper, and she would go down to the bus stop to catch the bus every day to go to work, and Beck would be waiting for her, and she would say, "Good morning, Beck. How are you?" And he would say, "Good morning, Mrs. Jack. I'm doing all right." And they would stand there at the bus stop, and talk like old friends. And I just remember that, this tall, elegantly dressed wino and my little mom, standing at the bus stop, and Beck would stay with her until the bus came, so that nobody messed with her, and nobody ever did because Beck carried a gun. And there was this sweetness, this wistfulness about that, and that's the kind of thing I try and capture and put down on the page above and beyond story. That's what I'm always looking for. You're always only partially successful, but I like the pursuit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of the things that I love about the genre too. Is with good books, like with characters like that, where yes, of course, there's this mystery to solve, and that's the frame of which we're telling the story. But that almost just becomes kind of secondary. Like, you want to know who did it, but by the end, like that's just kind of the bonus to this really great story where you get to visit with these people that you get to know, book after book after book.
Yes. Plotting is mostly math. It's mapping out all these moves and which character does what and where the reveals are and that kind of thing. And so you can always think about plot. It's the rest of it that's the meat.
So do you have any kind of like series Bible or kind of notes so that way you know like this is where I left this character the last time I saw them, so that way you can kind of keep up with continuity stuff?
No, I remember. I remember where everybody is. And that's just a product of being the character. No. And always writing from a character's point of view. And you have to get into somebody's head and see the world the way they do. And so I don't really lose track of that.
So one of the things I also wanted to ask you about is I want to talk a little bit about kind of going back to some marketing stuff. I want to talk a little bit about kind of your titles and also your covers, because you have these really great covers that it's just like your name and then like a word. High five was kind of 2 words. So how do you come up with titles, and what was the decision to have kind of that graphic cover as opposed to like, an image of a detective or an image of a person?
I had nothing to do with the covers. They asked me, did I like them? But I don't have any say in them. I mean, when I saw the cover of IQ, I was blown away. The colors. I mean, the covers are killer, and they were designed by a guy named Capo Eng, and he's designed all of them. And I love the guy. What was your first question?
Let's talk a little bit about the titles too, because they're all just like one-word titles too.
The titles, well, IQ had to be the first name of the first book.
Yeah.
But it was my editor who came up with the idea of one-word titles. And it helped make the cover clean.
Yeah.
So it isolated the title and isolated my name. But that was Josh's idea. And it was an Elmore Leonard thing. And I liked it. It's hard finding the word, though. I prefer, a word that's a noun and a verb. But it takes a long time to winnow through them. And then a lot of people have to approve. There's a management group, there's a marketing group, and all these people have to go, well, do we like this? And we've argued about it. We've gone back and forth about titles, but, I'm happy with them.
Yeah, I think clean is a great word for the covers, because it's not, they appear like they're kind of simple or not kind of overly designed, but at the same time you look at them and but they clearly are, because they're sometimes like you can tell where the publishers just like slapped a cover on something, but you can see kind of the thought, and it's so striking because they're just so different than everything else that's kind of out there.
Yes, I'm really fortunate. I'm really fortunate.
So what are you working on now? Are you working on the next book? Do you like to take a little bit of break between them? Where are you in your process?
The Raymond Chandler estate asked me to write a contemporary Philip Marlowe.
Ooh.
And that's what I'm doing now.
Very cool.
It's a different palette, different colors to use. The writing isn't so daunting because I write the way I write. And Chandler's books were written in the first person. I could never do that in a million years. But I'm trying to keep Marlowe's attitude and the feeling of him, that brashness, that boldness. And, I'm using a number of sort of references from his books, like his office was on North Ivor and Hollywood Boulevard. And so is my Marlowe's. Those kinds of things. And it's mostly his attitude. I see him as sort of, I wanted him to be a cool guy and contemporary. So he's sort of Brad Pitt with an attitude. And it's fun writing. I just finished a draft, and it's with my editor. And so we'll go back and forth, a few times. And it'll come out in February of next year.
Oh.
And the most daunting thing is that there are millions of fans around the world to disappoint. Yeah. I think I'll get a mixed reaction no matter what. No.
So did you do a deep dive going back and rereading the other ones, or did you just do like some research to kind of familiarize yourself with
I read 3 of the books.
Yeah.
And again, try to get the feeling of him more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of, the best you can do. Because like you said, I mean, there are going to be people that, I mean, there are going to be people that are like, oh, I don't want this before they've even picked it up. But we
Yes.
found that, especially with like, so many people now, like, there's so many people continuing the Clancy books or what Ace Atkins is doing with the Spencer books or even Sophie
Mm-hmm.
Hannah with the Poirot that, that I think people are more accepting and more willing to kind of dig into that stuff, especially when they know, like, there aren't going to be any more Agatha Christie's and they've read them all like 16 times. And if
Yeah.
they can find
Mm-hmm.
somebody that can, like you said, kind of capture the feel or the essence of it, and so it still kind of has that feel of it, I think people are a lot more accepting. So that's super exciting. So does that mean that you're taking a year off from Isaiah, or are you doing one of those as well?
Yes, I'm taking a year off. I think, well, the Little Brown folks thought, there's a lot of IQ in the air. you know, and there's a lot of advertising and media and all these kinds of things. And they thought, well, if I'll do Marlowe, that's a good way for me and the audience to get a break. And so I'll do IQ6 after that.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's always, I think you can always kind of tell after a writer has kind of, they've done a standalone and they've gotten to do something that either maybe it's a passion project or it's something like this that like you get to do. It's always great to see kind of that next book when they come back, because you can tell like, hey, this person has clearly missed this character. I love those books where you get kind of that little bit of break. And so the reader has time to miss them too. And then you kind of get to rediscover that old friend again after a little bit of a break.
I'm
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, Marlowe's an icon,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
yes, I really wanted to see what I could do.
Yeah. Awesome. So you said so that should be coming around this time next year?
Yes,
Very cool.
yes.
So I wanted to mention before we head out this evening, we're getting close to time. I didn't mention this earlier. Joe has been kind enough to sign some book plates for us. So while we don't have signed copies of Smoke, we do have signed book plates to go with it. We also have all of the other books in the series. So that reminds me. So do you recommend, if nobody has met Isaiah before, do you recommend that they go back and they start with IQ and read the first book, or do you think that they can jump in here with Smoke?
They can do either. I would read the first book first because it has Isaiah's origin story.
Mhm.
And, it always used to sort of a pet peeve. There would be these detectives in books and TV series, and they just show up, with all these skills,
Mhm.
you
Yeah.
know. And you always say, well, what happened? no,
Yeah.
how, where did they get all these skills? And and so I wrote his backstory to please myself, really, and because I wanted a logical set of reasons for why Isaiah became Isaiah, and so that's why I would recommend going back to the first one. But I wrote them all too as standalones.
Mhm. We had somebody had seen either a review of the new book or had maybe read an interview with you the other day, and they came in and they were wondering. And I also said the same thing. I was like, I would start with at the very least, if you don't want to read them all in order, at least start with the first one. So, like you said, you can kind of get that origin story and kind of get to really know the character before you dive into the rest of the world.
Mhm.
Awesome. Well, Joe, thank you so much for joining us this evening. If you guys have been watching and you came in late, we have been talking with Joe Ide, whose newest IQ book, Smoke, has just come out. As I mentioned, we've got signed book plates for it. If you missed the first part of the event and you want to go back and rewatch any part of it, Facebook and YouTube will archive it for you. Sometimes YouTube takes just a little bit longer because it has to process and code the video and all of that, but they'll be up available to watch. And while you are playing around on Facebook and YouTube looking at this event, definitely make sure you check out the others. We did 130 virtual events in 2020, I think, with over 200 authors, and we have done a whole lot of them this year. So there is a wealth of author stuff out there. One of the nice things about the pandemic is that we've been able to do this and be able to chat with people that might not maybe make it to the store. Now we've been lucky to host you once,
Yeah.
but it's been nice to have kind of these interviews be out there for people to be able to discover, and kind of prolong a little bit of the promo for the book. So we know that people will keep we'll sit like in a couple of weeks, people are like, hey, I just caught that interview, I want to pick up that book. So we've been really happy to be able to do some stuff like this.
It's a great
So
thing.
yeah.
It's a great service
Mhm.
to acquaint readers with really all of these writers. It's really it's a really great thing you're doing.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see kind of once we're able to do stuff in store again, how we can still supplement that with being able to do stuff like this for authors, especially like
Yeah,
authors that live overseas, or even just figure out a way. Because, you know, about a third of what we've done at the store historically has always been mail order for people ordering signed copies. So there are people who order books from us all the time, but have never been able to actually see or attend
yeah,
an author event. So we're excited to see how we can kind of still keep doing stuff like this and even store stuff and be able to kind of make it more interactive and be able to kind of connect more readers that way too. So
yeah. You're doing a terrific thing, John. Really.
thanks. I appreciate it. So Joe, thank you so much for chatting with us tonight. Hopefully once the world kind of rights itself and we figure out what the new normal is, maybe this time next year we'll be having you in the store, hopefully talking about your new Marlowe book. So
Happy
you
to.
take care and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, John.